It's great to have your participation. I think this is a really important session. A number of us had the privilege of participating in the launch of the book on the CSP, CSP Mark I, if you like. And it was a really important and reflective, it is a really important reflective book. And we're glad that some of the authors are in fact with us. I think Sue and James are with us. But it's also important that we think into the future and we consider the current CSP program and develop an understanding. We can't really engage around the program, and of course the CSP is a really, really important agency for local government, for planning and for other fields of intervention. And so we can't really engage properly if we don't understand the program adequately. And so this is a real opportunity for us to gain an understanding of the intentions of CSP for its next phase. And we're particularly pleased that we can have with us the program manager for CSP, and I will introduce Sibongile Mazibuko now, but also the full team, I think, are with us. And so let me just say that it's a privilege to have Sibongile. She's an erstwhile colleague of mine. It goes back some time when we both sat in the city manager's executive committee in the city of Joburg. That was maybe about 10 years ago, but it's wonderful to connect again with Sibongile. I was just the naive academic coming into local government at the time, but Sibongile was a truly seasoned local government practitioner. She already then, 10 years ago, had extraordinary experience in local government in multiple positions, taking us through the transitional period of local government as Secretariat to the Johannesburg Transitional Negotiations Committee, Senior Legal Advisor to the Soweto City Council, CEO of the Southwestern Sub-Council, worked also in a senior position in the Western Metropolitan Council, a regional director within the city of Johannesburg. And when I was a colleague, she held the really important position of executive director of the 2010 FIFA World Cup, and did an extraordinary job as a really strong leader within the city of Joburg at that time. And she went on to be city manager of Mangaung Metropolitan Council, so she has a leadership and understanding from the highest levels, and is currently the CSP project manager. So she brings more than 32 years, I think, experience in local government and now in national government, giving support to local government. And she has with her also a formidable team. So we have with us Samantha Naidu, who's responsible for the finance and governance portfolio in the CSP, Yasmin Kuvadia for planning and reporting, Malebo Matulong, public transport, Seth Makatuka for human settlements, Anthea Stevens for climate resilience, Karen Harrison for economic development. I think we didn't include on the list, but Bernadette Leon in strategic support, and Sibongile can advise me if I have left anyone out. And so we have with us the full team, not the full team, but the full leadership team in CSP. And we have an opportunity now to engage. And there are many, many questions, I think, in our minds. And Sibongile is going to take us through the presentation. But I think the sort of questions we need to be thinking about as she presents is, what is this urban reform agenda? What are we really talking about? And have there been strategic changes in this agenda between CSP Mark I and CSP Mark II? Is it just changes in accent? With COVID-19, has that implied changes in approach? Has it prompted us any strategic redirection? And I would also like to push them a little bit on the question of whether the big metropolitan cities are still the drivers in our national economy, still as important now as they were, and many other questions. But let's hear Sibongile, and then it will be your turn to pose some questions to her and to the team. Sibongile? Are you there, Sibongile? Are you on mute?
Good afternoon, colleagues. Am I audible?
Now you're audible. Yeah, very clear.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I begged to unmute myself for a minute there.
No problem.
Prof, thank you very much, and good afternoon, colleagues. I am not sure who else is in the room. Only one side of this room has been introduced, but I am told that there are a number of academics that are in the room. There are a number of local government experts and policy and development experts in the room. Thus, for those that I have not acknowledged, please accept my apology. I also have realized that there is quite a number of participants in the room that are also more experienced in local government than I am, and who actually have played a key role in the development agenda of our country. To those individuals, I would like to pay my appreciation for you to be here. I am leading a team of experts in their own right. Thus, I am going to present the presentation to yourselves, but I'm also going to allow my team to come in as we progress, in particular in the component work that they are doing, so that they can actually add their voice and be heard. Can we move to the second slide, please? The problem statement that we would want to put on the table, and this is, in my view, a shared program statement, that the cities are the drivers of our national economy, but they still have, and they still are the driver, Prof, but they are not yielding the dividend, the urban dividend that other cities in the world are yielding. And we actually have reasons for that. It's firstly our dislocation of people to jobs allocation, is the high transport costs in our our urban poor, is the low densification that has happened in our country, and unsustainable service delivery that has happened in our country in previous years. It's also a dysfunctional resident property market, and also it's actually the growth of the informal settlements that actually bedevils our country. We also acknowledge that there are a number of policy frameworks that are in place, and those policy frameworks continue being not yielding the impact that we would like to see. The NDP is one of those policy frameworks, and the IUDF, under which umbrella we function as the CSP in National Treasury, we actually, it's actually our umbrella policy framework that we work under. But there is still fiscal and sectoral level policy investment that are misaligned. One of them is the human settlement policy framework. It's also the public transport policy in that sector, and it's also the economic development. These policies are still misaligned and are not actually yielding the dividend that we would have thought by now, 25 years into our democracy, we would have seen. As I indicated earlier on, the urban reform agenda that we perform and that we are structured under is that of the IUDF. The vision of the IUDF, as we all know, is to develop livable, safe, resourced, efficient cities that are socially integrated and economically inclusive and are globally competitive, and where the residents are actively participants in their urban life. And the vision of the IUDF is supported by a number of 4 goals, which is inclusion and access, inclusive growth, effective governance, and spatial integration. These goals are actually supported by 9 levers, which levers inform our positioning as the CSP in terms of integrated urban planning and management, the issues of integrated transport mobility, integrated sustainable human settlement, integrated urban infrastructure, efficient land governance and management, and inclusive economy. And these levers actually inform our main formation as CSP, because we believe that they are a big strategic, they inform the big strategic priorities that we are driving. What does the CSP stand for? And Prof, you've asked the question, what is different from this CSP from the phase 1 CSP? When the DG of National Treasury approved the second phase of CSP, he actually made it a conditional approval. That one of the things that this phase of CSP must achieve is the institutional of the change agenda, of the change focus in the urbanization agenda, in national departments, in provinces, in such a way that all national departments and provinces support in policies and in practice, support the development of the urban agenda. That's how we are actually realizing this, is still maintaining the same developmental objectives that were a precedent in CSP1, which is actually to support more compact, connected and transit-orientated cities through spatial transformation by capable metro governments, and supported by enabling policy and regulatory framework that are passed by national departments and provincial departments, and that are supported by fiscal incentives. The intended outcome is to actually have a metro that is able to implement strategies to accelerate inclusive economic growth, and by building inclusive and productive and sustainable cities. The policy environment must support the metros, and the fiscal incentives must support this agenda of urbanization. Now, if you could actually look at the Venn diagram, the city support program is actually represented in the 3 circles that actually interact in the star where the city support sits. And this Venn diagram, the circles represents the city support, the fiscal framework and the financial instruments, the enabling environment and policy reforms. And the city support program is then structured through 5 components that drive this agenda, which is the core governance and its and fiscal work. It is also the economic development and its climate resilience and its public transport and human settlement. Next slide, please. CSP exists, as I indicated earlier, under the umbrella of the IUDF, but it is located in National Treasury. Under the umbrella, the IUDF is implemented through 3 programs, which is the City Support Program, which is delivered by the National Treasury through the CSP, and it is the Intermediary City Support Program, which is delivered by SALGA, and the Small Towns Program, which is delivered by COCTA. In the National Treasury itself support the city agenda through a number of programs and interventions. These programs are the annual planning and budgeting process, is the Circular 88, which is the reporting reform, is the intergovernmental coordination, it's a local government fiscal framework, grants and own revenue, and is the municipal debt recovery. Now, if we appreciate that National Treasury itself is driving these fiscal agenda items, and some of them come from the first phase of the CSP period, for example, the Circular 88, the M-Score, and the Muni money. Those are some of the harvested tools that were harvested in CSP1 and are now being institutionalized in National Treasury. As part of the CSP, the following programs are being developed and delivered under the components that I earlier referred to. The fiscal and governance component has the following highlight projects that contribute towards the IUDF, which is the leadership support, the integrated accountability and transparency, the urban reform, and financing, the infrastructure delivery, and project preparation and project implementation. Under the economic development, the critical projects for the IUDF is the township economic development, is the sub-national doing business, and there is the regional economic development. And under human settlement, the prioritized projects are informal settlements upgrading, is the urban land reform, and is the residential property market. In the public transport, the highlighted projects are the public transport grant reforms and the financial viability of the IPTN. Under the climate and sustainability, the projects that are highlighted for the IUDF is the climate resilience, capable investment asset management, and the water resilience and energy and solid waste projects. Now, if you look at these projects under the CSP, these are not the only projects that the CSP is delivering, but these are the main projects that are identified to actually report and support the urban agenda under the IUDF. The next slide, please. These reforms and project implementations are happening within a context of a very, very challenging fiscal and budget constraints. Pre-COVID, we all know that the country was actually downgraded by most of the grading agency, and our SOEs were facing serious challenges. Our unemployment was hovering towards 30%, and persistent inequality was actually growing. Huge revenue shortfalls. In fact, our main budget budget revenue and expenditure in the graph on top towards my right actually indicates that the mouth of a hippopotamus between the budget and revenue, the expenditure and revenue ratios were showing a huge split towards the level of clear unsustainability. The other graph that is highlighted is actually in-year budgeting forecast for 2020 prices. It shows actually a negative trend, and this is actually quite worrying. The other graph that is at the bottom is actually depicts the debt service cost as a proportion of the main budget. Thus, our service costs in the national fiscals are becoming unaffordable, and the exposure of the country, South African Inc., is actually becoming quite a challenge. In terms of COVID, the post-COVID picture is such that the GDP is expected to shrink by 7.2% in 2020. National revenues are expected to be 304 billion less than budgeted. The expenditure is at a percentage of GDP would increase, revenue drops, and the hippo mouth would continue to widen. It's expected to be closer to 14.6% of the main budget deficit, and the debt service costs are actually also growing in an unsustainable fashion. Job losses are reaching an unprecedented 3 million jobs that have been lost within the COVID pandemic itself. Next slide, please. And the question you were asking, Prof, around how is the program reacting, and is the program still sustainable within the challenges that are brought by the COVID? In the metros themselves, we actually are now dealing with a drop in revenue. It is expected that the impact is still the impact on metros is still uncertain, but metros are reporting between 30% in drop of revenue in April. Several metros have seen a real drop in the April revenue between 40 to 60%. Spending pressures are also facing metros. These spending pressures were a reality even before COVID, because the capital expenditure spent were actually deteriorating. When me and you, Prof, were in local government in our heydays, the spend of local government capital expenditure was hovering between 92 and 96%, which was actually a very good performance. But within the current reality, and also affected by COVID, we had realized that the grant expenditure in terms of capital expenditure has deteriorated in a significant ways. Thus, the impact and the increase of indigents are a reality within the economic downturn. The provision of this unsustainable provision of sanitation of public transport facilities and vehicles has also taken a toll on these expenditure line items for metros. The provision of water and sanitation and waste services have increased. The metros have increased the frequency of these services in informal settlements, but they still are not at a level where you could actually say, I am proud of the service. This is the value for money. Thus, it is still unsustainable. We've seen an increase of the service in terms of the number of times the informal settlements, sanitation and water are being they are provided with services, but it's actually not in a sustainable way. The provision for temporary shelter for homeless people, this has actually brought in clear, in my view, fault lines of how the municipalities and also government has actually cared for its poorest of the poor, the homeless of our country. Some of the metros were already in financial distress before the epidemic, the pandemic started, but they continue to be increasingly within this particular situation. In fact, last week we saw the rating agents coming up with a report on the state of finances of our metros, and only Cape Town was showing some resilience during this period. The COVID pandemic has also exposed weaknesses in terms of and setbacks in terms of achieving some of the development goals in the metros, and great pressure and weakened cities in driving social and economic recovery and responses is actually our biggest challenge at hand. Next slide, please. Now, the question you are asking, how do we keep the reform agenda on track within these challenges that we are facing, and how do we ensure that the reform agenda is resilient towards these challenges that we are facing? The first thing that we need to say is that the urban reforms are still driven by the planning and budgeting and reporting reforms. And these reforms are actually, in our view, supported by the Constitution and are driven by the transversal Department of National Government, which is DPSA, COCTA, National Treasury, and DPME, and the Department of Environment has now actually raised their hand to be one of the transversal departments. These reforms are actually the planning reforms, the budgeting reforms, and the reporting reforms. The IUDF calls for urban reforms are actually more important now in the pandemic than they were before. And we believe that the responsible departments that our Constitution has placed the responsibility of driving these reforms still has that responsibility. National Treasury still has the responsibility to drive the budgeting reforms. National Treasury, COCTA, and DPME have still the responsibility to drive the reporting reforms, and COCTA and DPME still have the responsibility to drive the planning reforms. And these reforms are actually even more critical in our view now, in light of also the coordination approach that the country is taking under the formation of the DDM. Next slide, please. Now, I have indicated that the DDM under this term of office has brought in the call for a one plan and the district model approach. We ourselves are still actually discussing as to how does this call by the president enhance our planning, our budgeting, and our reporting reforms, and how can these be hastened in actually realizing assistance and the necessary coordination in the local sphere, in particular in metros and the 42 districts, in a differentiated approach. We acknowledge that the IDP, as much as it was the all of government plan, has not delivered what it was meant to do. We've also acknowledged that the IDPs needs to be heightened in terms of getting the participations of all spheres of government, thus integration and coordination of all spheres of government into this one plan is what we acknowledge needs to be heightened. Now, in terms of the 5-year plan, we believe that there are these following planning tools: the IDPs, the MTREF, the SDBIPs, the annual reports, and the term of office reports. And in terms of the 20 to 30-year plan, and we are saying that there is no culture, in particular in the whole of government, to plan together and to perform together in a long term and in a sustainable way. Thus, we think that the one plan as demanded by the president would actually provide us the overall integrated outcome and indicators. And these should be built on the IDP, the GDSs, and also at a national and global level, the new urban agenda, which is the IUDF, the National Development Plan, the provincial and plans and GDSs, and also the sector MTSF implementation plans. Next slide, please. Just to look at some of the tools that started with CSP1 and that are continuing to support the alignment of planning, budgeting, and reporting, and also adding into the mix the DDM chapter, we are of the view that in the planning reforms, there are a number of tools that government in totality has created over time. The intergovernmental planning and budgeting, coordinating and alignment, which is actually, in our view, the major tool to deliver the DDM, SPLUMA, the reforming the regulatory environment for urban reforms, and BEPS, and the 2020 metro-specific IDP guidelines that we're working through could actually enhance the planning reform agenda, and the review of the CDSs and GDSs and MSDFs for long-term sector strategic infrastructure plannings and guidelines. In the fiscal and financial budgeting, we believe that the IUDF lever 9 is the important lever. The revenue management in terms of M-score and specialized budgeting is critical. The pledging of grants and borrowing framework is also critical. The development charges reform agenda that we are driving is also critical. The long-term planning strategies, and in particular the government debt recovery, is actually quite a critical path of work that we are doing. In terms of reporting, The municipal money is a critical tool that is now institutionalized in Treasury. The city data innovation that we've actually opened in the CSP1, and we're continuing in customizing that data from SARS and Stats SA for metros to use for their planning. The Circular 88 is a tool that we are now expanding to include indicators like the climate resilience indicators and also the shared reporting platforms that we've actually introduced over a period of time are now being stabilized. Now I am going to go through the report, the projects that are in each component. I don't intend going through each and every one of them. I intend flashing them through with just emphasis on a few. For example, I did indicate that one of the critical conditions that CSP2 was created was the issue around institutionalization, in particular around leadership support and the development of masterclasses that would actually support leaders, not only at local government, but leaders at local government as a priority, but also leaders at community and also at provincial and national level, with clear participation of the community of practice that actually takes into account some of aspects of prior leaders of local government to come in and take and contribute towards creating this capacity in local government. The other part that I want to highlight and emphasize on is the transversal management. And in our view, the transversal management is not only a local government need, but it is a need even at provincial and at national government. Also in relation to core and shared functions like human settlement, that transversality must be introduced and must be practiced by all three spheres of government, working together with the private sector and civil society. The other area is the issue of fiscal and financial reforms, and we are of the view that the biggest driver of these reforms is what we are referring to as the land value capture, in terms of actually driving a geographic space reforms that actually also contribute by the private sector investing and getting developmental rights in a specific area, geographic area, but also contribute towards the revenues of the metros, and also the issues of long-term financial strategies in specifically in metros, because metros can leverage out of their borrowing, out of their grants, but they can also leverage around the involvement of the private sector as investment partners in the development of their spaces. Continue. In terms of the infrastructure reform, the biggest work we are working towards now is actually the infrastructure reform priorities, and also the issues of affordable housing and well-located integrated human settlements, the expanded investments into core infrastructure. We are partnering with the presidency in the development of the infrastructure invitation to the private sector to invest in the metros for the development of and for investment in this infrastructure development, to facilitate deeper access to private financing. And this is, in our view, the long tenure debt reform that we are engaging, in particular the institutions like the DBSA, in terms of taking a long-term view, and the World Bank of this world, in terms of taking the long-term view in their funding of municipal infrastructure, unlike limiting them into the 10-year exposure that actually have been the plan in the past. The other one is in relation to planning and investment for resilient infrastructure. This is one area of work that we are actually looking towards, actually immersing ourselves into the pressure to support economic recovery. We actually are looking at stimulus to deepen resilience in terms of fossil fuels and carbon intensive growth, and also the issues around ensuring investment in climate resilience, low carbon infrastructure, such and sustainable development investment pathways, and also the areas of investments and repairs in times of disasters, and also the challenges around significant public sector investment in infrastructure between 1998 and 2019. The infrastructure investment by government has reached 3.2 trillion rands, but this has not translated into the high level of economic returns that one would have anticipated with that amount of rand invested in infrastructure. Also, the other issue is that what I referred to earlier on, the unspent grants have now reached a level that is unsustainable. I mean, if communities are complaining about the state of infrastructure and metros are not spending their free money, which is their grants, then how would you expect them to even go into the market and use the market tools to actually drive higher growth? The other issue around building the capacity for infrastructure is about purifying or re-emphasizing the process between infrastructure planning, infrastructure implementation, and infrastructure management. And our view is that in the past 2 decades, there has been a very, very weak area of work in terms of infrastructure planning, infrastructure implementation, and also infrastructure management. And that is why we see so much of our infrastructure collapsing, because the value of what we invest in our infrastructure is proportionate to the quality of the infrastructure we end up receiving from our metro. And this is an area of us saying, are we getting the value of the rent for the money we are investing in the infrastructure we are developing in the democratic South Africa? And in doing that, we are actually having a number of programs in the CSP. Could you take one slide back? We are actually looking at the city investment plans in terms of project preparation and project delivery. We are looking at creative urban development nodes in terms of CLDPs. We are looking at CIDMS, which is actually the city's infrastructure delivery and management system. And we're looking at cities' resilience assets and cities' investments that are actually quite resilient in terms of climate change. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. In the human settlement reform, we have 3 reforms that are critical. It's actually the reform in terms of scaling up citywide informal settlements upgrading. And we are emphasizing the citywide because we are of the view that the poor, the informal settlement is the gateway for the poor, and the tools that we've developed over time in terms of the informal settlement upgrading tools must actually now reach a citywide agenda, and that must also enhance the private and the civil society engagement in terms of improving the delivery of the informal settlements upgrading. COVID-19 has highlighted the significant weaknesses in terms of this program, and we would like to actually pay more attention to it and actually get all the interested parties in both government and also the private sector, but also in all 3 spheres of government in prioritizing the informal settlements upgrading. The other area of work is the understanding of the residential property market and the instruments that we've developed over time with CAF and the township residential property market, which we believe can actually drive the township economy to a greater level, and also the urbanization reviews that have been done in the prior years. The other part is where we are talking about a housing strategy planning, where we actually think that We cannot continue planning our houses and locating our houses into the periphery of our metros. We need to take the TOD approach and place our residential developments in the transport spines of our metros, and also yield or harvest that investment in terms of bringing the residents of our country closer to the places of work and reducing the cost of travel. Continue. Next slide. In terms of the economic development reforms, we are approaching it in the following way. We are building capacities for planning, delivering within management of economic spaces so that they can be more inclusive and productive and competitive. And this we are doing through the planning approach, where we actually have a number of planning tools that we are developing, which is driven by the specialized economic data, the participatory planning approach that we are taking, the multi-level planning assets and precincts, and then in the, and I'm not going to read all of them, but in the delivery machinery, we are actually looking at a transversal approach, in particular within, and also and to demonstrate leadership or matured leadership, in particular in the sub-national doing business, a partnership for inclusive incentives for regulatory instruments for resource mobilization. In the management area, we are actually looking at appropriate urban management arrangements that would actually drive the multi-stakeholder institutions and also inclusive growth coalition. Next slide. Slide, please. Just in relation to how we've responded to COVID, we have actually taken a view that COVID has actually put the necessary pressure, and we couldn't afford to lose the traction that comes with the agency of this particular epidemic. And we actually have convened, we've developed a COVID-19 information portal. We've actually are convening on a bi-weekly basis the managers, the economic development managers of the metros. And we also have a city economic strategy facilitation that we are actually delivering through webinars, and also learning out of other destinations or out of other metros, how they have dealt with in terms of digitization, informal trader support, and industrial park revitalization. And also the city specialized economic development data projects that have actually assisted us in mapping the metros of the location of jobs, sectors, and firms that are driving our economy, and also the development of the city economic development data strategy. In terms of improving sustainability during COVID, we've actually included a process of the township economic development support in Tembisa and South Pinetown, Hammanskraal, and New Brighton and Delft, and the industrial park revitalization in Babelegi, Devland, and Jacobsdal, and the partnership for inclusive growth in eThekwini CBD. And in terms of improving the business climate, we're dealing with under the SNDB, we're dealing with the construction permits reforms, we're dealing with getting the electricity and the property registration process. You remember, colleagues, that the president has actually put a target to improve our national rating in terms of sub-national doing business, so that we can be more competitive and actually be able to attract more investment. And the city of Johannesburg is our proxy for the national doing business agenda. In terms of climate resilience, just the system for climate response is actually anchored in the 4 following areas: the improved disaster management, the climate resilience and planning, the climate resilience capital investment, the climate resilience asset management. And in terms of climate responsive service delivery, we are focusing on the water resilience, sustainable municipal energy, and solid waste. and the policy framework cuts across all these areas of work. I'm not going to go through each and every of the climate responses. Safe to say that for each, in terms of improvement of disaster management, we actually are better coordinated, and we want to have better financed disasters. In terms of climate resilience and planning, we want to have climate information that informs climate risk zones. And in terms of climate resilience capital investments, we want to actually have a city system that will strengthen the city systems and tools that are actually assist us in planning for a more resilient and more well packaged and strengthened capacity. And in terms of climate resilient assets, we want to, working within the CIDMS and CLDP, we would like to have asset management systems that improve resilience of existing and new infrastructure. And this is also driven by the financing climate responses, which actually is galvanized through reviewed mechanism for financing metro climate through this support development of cities climate financing facility, climate contributions to NDCs, and so on. Next slide, please. Then in terms of waste, water resilience, we have done a budget diagnostic for water, the metro water budget to support resilience and sustainability of metro water and sanitation services through metro's water business diagnostics, metro reform agendas. And Prof, you'd remember that when we were in Joburg, the Joburg Metro resolved to actually ring fence both the water and the water service, and also the waste services, amongst others that were ring fenced. And these gains that were done by the Joburg Metro, we've over time seen them being weakened in the recent past. In the solid waste, we also think that we need to understand the metro waste business diagnostic and translate this into support initiatives and integration of waste reclaimers into the metro's waste management system, so that they can actually reduce the waste that goes into infill sites, and we can increase our program of capacitating the issues of reclaiming waste. Then the sustainable energy, this is in relation or related to the pronouncement by the president around enabling metros that are sustainable and can manage a diversification, and their budgets are allowing to actually drive revenue management of resilient metros by introducing alternative energy sources. This would do through cost of supply studies, metro electricity business diagnostic and transitional support, and new business models that would support munis IPP's procurement. Next slide, please. I'm sure I'm now reaching towards my last slides. In terms of public transport, we actually have a number of planning reforms that we are driving through the public transport reforms. This relate to the determination of routes for the BRT and how they integrate with the PTOCs, which are the provincial bus services, and also the issues how we stimulate relationship between the IPTNs, and also how we determine viable integration between the public transport modes, and also just how we navigate the end of the MBT concepts after the 12 years of the vehicles operation licenses. Joburg is one of those metros that is now reaching its 12 years a birthday around these VOCs, and we need to work with Joburg to say how do they progress forward, taking into account the issues around how do we subsidize the taxi industries going forward. Next slide. Next slide, please. In terms of public transport reforms, in terms of fiscal reforms. We are determining innovative tools for IPTNs, and we are also looking at policy reforms in terms of state of readiness for metros to take the devolution responsibilities of the PTOC and the technical support towards aiding acquisition of the PTOC functions. And in terms of the institutional reform, what we are looking at the issues of full functional transport planning and also just capacitating the metros. You remember, Prof, that in the late 2012, the issues of planning authorities in these metros were a high item in their agendas, but over time, this has not been actually met with the traction of them being authorities that have teeth in terms of their planning, in terms of their transport infrastructure and their transport deployment. Next slide, please. Next slide. Now, this is, I think, our last slide. We believe that the urban agenda is still an agenda that is worth investing in. We believe that metros are a very critical player in the economy of our country, and we believe that the CSP program, as has been evaluated a number of times, has proven to be a critical a program to invest in by government, safe, and only if it can be institutionalized as a change agenda that is realizable in all levels of government. This is critical for the issues of local or city level research and data, including long-term longitudinal study capabilities, strengthening of research, innovation, and technology in the ecosystem, servicing delivery innovations. And in this area, we would like to partner with municipally based institutions like Tshwane University, for example, Miles in eThekwini, and also the skills and education a mismatch or match to the sectors and communities and business needs in the cities. The destination of the marketing and branding of the educational institutions and the mobilization of students as key movers of the return of tourism markets in the international research partnership and the property and land discourse that is actually one of the big areas of universities as a major landowners and spatial development and place making and others that we can actually engage on. And in terms of this area, we believe that we've actually have a number of tools that we have developed over time, which tools are now ready to be translated into and are actually a body of knowledge in the reform, and they can actually now are ready to be made into curriculums for development and can be utilized for that. I'm not going to mention each and every one of them, but these tools are there and we are looking forward towards them seeing them into the curriculum of universities in our countries. Now, in conclusion, CSP is not a silver bullet, but rather a catalytic in the reform agenda of our country. It's also a diagnostic innovation testing through approach through pilots and practices. We are an agile program that is responsive and it responds to the context in our metros. We also think that our lessons that we've learned are also, we are able now to share with intermediary cities. We also believe that where the integrated approach of the program has been critical, but adds levels of complexities and requires intentional management. There has been also this has also been an ambitious program. However, some reforms have gone further than further in terms of informing the agenda of government, and the focus now is on institutionalization and on scaling up practices that are actually change driving in their nature and engaging in partnerships with critical partners. and we are keen to actually look at what partnerships we can actually forge with yourselves going forward in driving this urban agenda. Thank you very much. Thank you, Prof. Over to you.
Yes. Let me, oops, what have I done here? Sibongile, thank you so much. I mean, you've covered so well the extensive ground that is CSP, and it provides us an excellent basis for informed engagement. I won't forget the hippo mouth. It's certainly sobering to look at some of those fiscal and economic realities which frame the context for pursuing the urban agenda that you spelled out. I should say, before we go into what I hope will be a frank engagement, a frank and friendly engagement, I didn't do my introduction well enough at the beginning. I should have just mentioned that this is a special session of our Faces of the City seminar series. We normally finish at 5:30. We might go on a little bit more than 5:30 and perhaps towards 6 o'clock. So I should have just mentioned that. I should have also mentioned that it is being recorded and we do put it on the website. It's also important for our teaching that we record it. But I know the audience and I know that won't stop a really frank engagement. And the other thing I wanted to say, I did mention the book on CSP Phase 1, but I should have given you the title in case you want to Google it, and you'll find it online. And that's Supporting City Futures, the City Support Program and the Urban Challenge in South Africa. And that was written by James Duminy and Susan Parnell. So I think that's also important in terms of reflection and lessons from the previous phase. But I think Sibongile has really done an excellent job. And let's use the time now to engage. And let me take a few questions or comments. Lene, can you unmute? So Lene's going to help me just, there's a large group, so she's going to help me just track those who put their hands up. So either put your hands up electronically or just come in by unmuting yourself. Let's take a few comments and questions.
Okay, we've got a hand by Crispian Olva.
Do you want to come in?
Yes, hi there. Hello, Phil, and hello, Sibongile and the rest of the team. It's really good to see you.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. So I had one question which I'd already put on the chat, and maybe I should just repeat it and see if there are any responses. And then I wanted to add another point, if I may. So, I mean, the big problem we've had, and I know CSP grappled with this throughout its first phase. When I had a brief involvement in the IUDF, we grappled with it. And that is that housing and human settlements investments and public transport investments and all the investments around economic infrastructure, including Treasury's own incentives that, you know, they've got this inner city incentive program that they run. They're all working disparately. They're all incentivizing different kinds of behaviors, and they are not spatially aligned. And the CSP was driving towards spatial alignment with their BEPS, and I know that they were progressively getting a whole lot of SOEs and public works and others to put their information about public infrastructure spending into these spatial plans. And I'm just wondering whether in this post-COVID moment, when everything's going to be cut and we've got to do a lot more with a lot less, we can't be innovative and radical around how you structure these infrastructure grants so that developments have to be crowded in. They can't continue, you know, human settlements going off and doing their peripheral mega housing projects that they seem to be in love with. And, you know, Treasury controls that instrument. So theoretically, they could do something with that. I wanted to add one other point, which is unrelated to that. And it's a sort of gap in the presentation that you've given us. And I know it's an area Treasury likes to stay away from because it's a bit political. But that is the protection that is needed for senior managers in local government. We have a runaway situation, and it hasn't spared the metros. I mean, just down the road, a city that I wrote about not so long ago, Nelson Mandela Bay, has, you know, just got rid of the only city manager that had any hope of turning that city around. And as things currently stand, you know, the council, which is basically an alliance of rent-seeking thieves, can do what they want. You know, they want to get rid of their city manager, they can fire him. And there's nobody that's sitting over them and intervening. And I've been sort of trying to explore some ideas around something like a public service commission for local government, where senior managers can at least appeal if they're being unfairly targeted, and which can, in cases like Nelson Mandela Bay, intervene and block a good manager being chased, hounded out of the municipality. So I wanted to know if there were any comments on that. So thanks. Sorry, I went on a bit, Phil.
No, that's great. Those are important points, and it's certainly been further spatial misalignments during the COVID crisis. So both points are really important. Keep the chat room going. I know Mike's always a bit naughty on the chat room, but that's good. So we'll also pick up some of those points. Linnea, on the other hand?
So Tanya Zak, I wonder if you want to ask your question, Tanya Zak, because it's sort of a question and a statement at the same time.
Tanya?
Thank you. Thanks, Spongile. Spongile, what is the role of local government in leading the spatial transformation and spatial integration? We know that there's discussion about localizing the IUDF. What does this mean going forward for the CSP? How do you put the power into the hands of local government, who surely should be at the forefront of spatial integration, and, you know, are sort of on the back foot for several reasons. One of them being that they don't have control over spatial development in the areas where Department of Public Works and SOEs have land holdings, but there are obviously other reasons as well. Can you maybe address us a bit on that, on the role of local government?
Thanks, Tanya. I think it's important to know what localizing really means.
Okay. Sorry, we have a third question by Mike Muller.
Okay. Mike, you're welcome.
Thank you. At least I'm a regular attender to the faces, so I claim some privilege. Just 3 quick points. The first is an obvious one. I really missed any reference to ICT, and looking at my screen, ICT is kind of important to the city. We wouldn't be functioning without it. And it's become more important over this phase, but it's helped us to understand a different dimension. And I just would like to understand how CSP deals with ICT. And then just 2, it's a micro point and a macro point. The micro point actually links to ICT. Sibongile, I really enjoyed the presentation. Thanks. I've often wondered about CSP, and I now have a better handle on it, so I'm very grateful. But you were worried about infrastructure spending being wasted. And if you just travel anywhere around the city of Johannesburg and a number of other cities, and you see the damage that's being done by the ineffective control of fiber installation, which is destroying roads, destroying pavements, destroying water, destroying energy infrastructure. without any oversight. And I missed any sense in your presentation of just how important the operational management of infrastructure is, because it makes it, damage a water pipe takes 15 years off a 20-year life, or a cable. So what we're seeing happening in the cities, because we don't focus enough on proper operations and oversight, is we're putting in infrastructure and immediately reducing its life by 75%. The macro point about infrastructure and CSP is that I really worry about CSP's inward focus on cities, which means that you don't engage effectively with the external drivers of, let's say, energy, well, the ICT obviously, and water. And the sense I have is the climate resilience focus distracts from what actually I would expect the city to do. I haven't heard a city in the last year, when I've been sort of back advising the sector, I haven't heard cities desperately worried about where their water is going to come from in 5 years. And that's not going to be solved by city action directly. It will be solved by cities actively lobbying and engaging with their regional service providers, whether it's an ESCOM or whether it's a national department or a water board, to make sure they're doing the right thing at the right time. So I get worried about the insularity of the city, the CSP, because it's not being as active as I would have thought it could be in engaging with those regional and national agencies that are actually going to shape whether the city succeeds or fails. Because when your energy goes, you know, when your water goes, you know where we end. And I'm seeing certainly the Gauteng municipalities, Nelson Mandela Bay is another case of its own type, but eThekwini is also now severely at risk, because cities just don't seem to have engaged with their long-term water requirements. They're all looking at doing fancy little tweaks inside, and missing the big problem. Just look at Cape Town and you'll see what happens when you do that.
Thanks, Mark. It's always usefully provocative. Let me take a couple more, and then
so at the moment there aren't any more questions. I'm wondering whether we should maybe have them respond to the questions and comments, and then see what else comes up.
Sibongile, you tell us when you want to bring the team in. Do you want to start with the response first?
I think I have a team around me. Can I request Yasmin just to talk about the planning issues, Anthea to talk about how we are bringing the national departments and national SOEs into the city's water and electricity discourse. And if I could have Karen just talk about the issues of ICT and how we are actually driving that. And then I will come in and talk about the spatial agenda and how we are driving it in terms of also looking at SOE's assets in terms of land, and in particular strategically located land. Colleagues, who wants to go first?
I'll go with the planning.
Thank you, Yasmin.
Tanya, I believe that there is sufficient legislative basis to make sure that local government, and in our case, when we talk about metros, actually lead spatial transformation. While the spatial planning obligations are there for the different spheres to do spatial plan, they should do it in terms of their powers and functions. So you should not have a national department planning for local space, but depending on what their mandate is to plan in terms of that. It's only local government that has the land use planning function. Now, while that's protected in legislation, it's not respected by the rest of government. So you get a national minister of human settlements using a gazette to declare priority human settlements and housing development areas with inadequate consultation and agreement with the local municipalities that are involved. So we try as far as possible to protect the power and function and mandate of local government in this case. We're not always successful. And on the other hand, municipalities need to understand their unique land use planning function and to make sure they protect it themselves. But we'd welcome any kind of indication, support, guidance in how to do that better. Chippy, in terms of the chat question about the BEPS, we introduced the BEP and regulated it via the Division of Revenue because National Treasury does not have the planning function. We couldn't continue with that, or if I could say continuing being that tricky for a long, long time. We managed to document and write up the lessons learned from the BEPS. We have then managed to take it into, for example, the new IDP guidelines. We're hoping to do that with the MSDF guidelines, etc., and thereby be able to reform the planning system as we're running it. Again, we would welcome any further engagements on that, any guidance, any ideas on that. So that's there from the planning perspective. I'm not.
Anthea?
Sure, thanks. Thanks, colleagues. I'll turn on my video just to introduce myself. Hi, this is Anthea Stevens. So Mike, in response to your question, I mean, it's a key point. I think, well, it's a very relevant point. The grappling with the intergovernmental issues are critical to addressing a whole range of challenges, and the intergovernmental kind of city nexus is a kind of key focus of this phase of the CSP. So where we might have been in the first phase of the CSP, I'm saying that nervously, less explicitly engaging with the sectors, with the sector departments on particular issues, whatever sector department and whatever set of issues. This phase of the CSP, that's been a very strong kind of marching order that we got from DPME evaluation that we did at the kind of close of CSP1 and as we moved into CSP2. So setting our sights very firmly on the city sector set of issues is a critical focus, and I think we will have failed if we get to the end of this phase of the CSP and we haven't punched a few holes in those issues, and I'm saying that also nervously because they're massive and almost intractable issues, as you know much better, and many of you here know much better. But so I do want to say, on the one hand, it's something that we need to grapple with in across the sectors that we're working on. We also recognize that, and so from the work on water that we're starting off with now, and as Sibongile mentioned, we've just finished this kind of, say, rapid diagnostic of the metro water business. We're proceeding, say, cautiously, but we're wanting to recognize that there's a very strong set of issues that are within the metro's control in terms of tightening up the metro water business. We completely recognize that these happen within a much broader context of sectoral regulatory issues, and not just on the water side, water sector regulation, but Treasury's own set of regulations, and a whole kind of nested set of issues that you mentioned, issues with water boards and so on. So we're, in setting out our response, we're recognizing the interlinkages and proceeding accordingly, but we're wanting to try and focus some immediate and initial support on issues that the metros can and must grapple with. So, getting their collection rates and getting the kind of financial management of the water business a little bit more, optimized, dealing with things like, repairs and maintenance and addressing issues of non-revenue water. But, the broader water security issues, absolutely, they extend beyond the metro boundary. So those conversations with the intergovernmental role players are critical. And, you know, we will, our work certainly involves going forwards, trying to strengthen some of those partnerships, as it were, around the sort of regional water security issues. But we also recognize, you know, the challenges that exist, particularly in the water sector, also within the energy sector. And we certainly also recognize, you know, where we can tackle and what we need to be more cautious about what we tackle. So, you know, we're starting closer to home, and we're trying to build the coalitions and alliances that we need, and strengthen partnerships, which is part of that process, to engage in some of the sectoral issues. So, you know, critical but challenging. So not outside of our focus, but, you know, we're trying to be sensible about it. Thank you.
Karen?
Thank you. I'll come in then. Yeah, so Sibongile asked me to address some of the work we're doing in the field of ICT and digitization support. So obviously COVID-19 has really exposed the weaknesses within city systems and within our capacity as a country, particularly around business continuity of public services, and also in terms of supporting the private sector and communities during this time of lockdown. And obviously, again, in the arena, there are many actors. The focus we've been playing around digitization support has been in a number of areas. The main area is in terms of subnational doing business reforms. So it's looking at how do cities ensure business continuity processes through business optimization and automation, particularly in the areas, for example, of when small firms apply for electricity connections. So there's a lot of focus. We're working with cities around in terms of online outage management systems, stock management systems, and so on, electronic application systems. And all of these are processes that are underway in all 8 metros, which we support. When it comes to the property registration system within the country, the property registration system is a complex one because it has a whole value chain and a number of stakeholders within that value chain. So we've been pushing reforms at city level to automate their rates clearance and certification processes. This issue has come out very strongly during COVID-19, where our cities that were automated, like the city of Cape Town, have now facing severe backlogs with their deeds officers in their regions that are unable to keep up with the backlog that's accrued during the COVID-19 lockdown session. We're also working with the National Deeds Office within the Department of Rural Development and Agriculture. We work with the Surveyor General's Office, and they're pushing national level reforms primarily around getting an electronic deeds registration and system in place. So there's a lot of work around that. And then in the cities, the other area we're working on is on construction permitting and the automation of the system linked to optimizing those systems. So that's a big area where we focus, and the kind of methodology that is applied within the subnational doing business is also then applied elsewhere in the cities to try and create business process efficiencies. Obviously, a big area that's come up through our work in economic development at this time has been how do we support economic activity through increasing the digital infrastructure within the country and the space. So we have worked, we're working sort of collaboratively with the World Bank Group at the moment, and looking at supporting our metros in facilitating community access to digital infrastructure, and the kinds of issues that are being sort of addressed through working groups now that have been initiated is around infrastructure, and also how cities can engage in partnerships. There are private sector partners, there are community-based initiatives that can support cities in this regard, but supply chain management issues often come up as obstacles to forging of partnerships. So we're doing quite a lot of innovative work with the metros at the moment around how do we overcome some of those obstacles. And what we are definitely picking up in the metros are key economic shifts as a result of COVID-19. For example, in terms of shifting into online retail, sort of call centers that have actually begun expanding in terms of their activities, and all of this requires additional capabilities. As CSP, we can't play in all those spaces, but we definitely work with cities around identifying relevant actors, unblocking obstacles, and so on. And the last area we work with cities around in terms of digitalization is supporting some of the metros in integrating their own administrative data and then assisting them in accessing other data through new data sources so that they can start sort of looking at the interlinkages of their different and enhancing their planning and the implementation of service delivery through these integrated data systems. So there's a lot of experience as well within different metros around ICT use, around public transport and so on that I haven't touched on, but it is an area, of course, that we cannot ignore. Thank you.
Prof, just to touch on the question that Chippy raised, which is, in my view, the big elephant in the room, is the issue around how do we protect our local government experts to stay in local government and to grow that capacity. When we launched the book, the issue around the executive leadership program was raised as a question. And I remember Madi Jeng answering to say that program is still in our books and we want to implement it. And we are gearing it up now, working together with a number of institutions. But the biggest thing is about this fact, Chippy, that the capacity of local government is half what it was in the early years of our democracy. It has actually been weakened deliberately over the years. This is both a political and technical leadership. And if you engage with local government nowadays, you actually feel like you actually don't get that sense of the muscle of negotiation and the muscles of understanding and protecting the powers and functions of local government. And this, in my view, is as a result of the fact that those people that have exited, even those people that loved working in local government, have exited local government because you don't want to spend your hard-earned money fighting this, a mayor or a speaker who's using a municipal resources to fight you back. And that is not how you want to spend your hard-earned investment. Now, what you do is that you exit. You tell yourself, I'll get it something better somewhere. But the reality is that that weakens local government, and it has weakened local government over time. Your proposal around bringing up a public service commission for local government, for me, is at which stage would it intervene? Would it intervene after you've exhausted all your reserves, or would it intervene immediately? And what would be how would it be supported politically? Because this weakening of local government is a well-orchestrated agenda of people who want to take over the power or the purchasing power of local government. It is not a mistake. It is not actually any other thing, but people who have a specific agenda of actually looking at the resources of local government for a take. Now, I agree with you and would like to explore this idea with yourselves, because one of the things that we want to do is we want to actually institutionalize the capacitation of local government local government leaders. We are talking to the National School of Government around saying, how do you use the expertise that are out there of previous city managers, CFOs, engineers that have just left local government, and local government is falling flat. Even some of the mayors, we actually had very shrewd politicians that led local government over time. There are currently some of them sitting in national parliament. Some of them are sleeping there. And we need to understand, why are we losing that resource, which actually must drive this agenda of development. On the issues of the vandalization of infrastructure of local government through the Wi-Fi or broadband system, I agree with the colleague that has made the point. But I am also wondering in my mind that in early 2000, when the broadband was rolled out, there were initiatives to introduce way-leave policies in local government. Joburg championed a program to actually protect its infrastructure, but that has actually fallen flat. You don't actually see any compensation mechanism for all the broadband rollout in terms of way-leave rights in municipalities currently. And for me, it's that capacity that has been dwindled over time, the capacity of fighting for local governments standing even in the business sector, because it actually is a contested terrain. The capitalists would want to make maximum profit, and local government practitioners and politicians must defend this terrain. And they can only do that if they are capable to engage and if they actually know their rights, even in the planning sphere. I mean, I remember the days when I was a junior official and I would actually be sitting in discussions where a mayor would say, it will never happen in my metro. This is the city of Johannesburg. And the mayor would take the province to court, even to the Supreme Court, and even to the appellate division, and even in the Constitutional Court, to fight and defend the rights of this sphere of government. Those days are behind us. Currently, we have mayors that just don't understand what their role is and what their agenda for development is. And I think, for me, the public commission for local government is a good idea, but we need to say, where would it play and how do we bring forward the capacitation of local government as a sphere of government within the competing challenges that it's facing, one of them being the corruption agenda that we are dealing with. Thank you. Thank you, Prof.
Thanks very much, team, and thanks, Sibongile, and including for your very frank words. I think we can take another round, and if there's time, then some of the questioners can come back again if they wish to start dialogue. But let me just hear from Lene.
Yes, so I have first question from Mohammed Lokat, and then after that, Ivan Churok, if you can be the second person.
Okay. Mohammed, then Ivan.
Yes, greetings everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I've got three questions. Could the CSP or National Treasury shed some light on what exactly is the plan of action for the BRT implementation schedule? For example, I'm in the eThekwini region and I see the Go Durban stations just lying here empty. So what exactly is the plan to get this form of transportation functional? Secondly, could you shed some light on the devolution of energy, like for example, allowing metros to procure electricity directly from IPPs? I think today there was I think today the court rule, the Gauteng court rule that what's it called? Sorry, apologies. Today okay, can you just answer my first question, please? I'm sorry about that.
Okay, thanks, Mohammed. Ivan?
Let's unmute and do the video. Thank you very much. Thanks to the team for a very interesting presentation. Enjoyed it very much. And to the discussion. I've got three questions, stroke points. I should start by saying I'm a fan of the CSP. I was involved right at the outset when Dave Savage convened a small group of academics and practitioners in Cape Town to talk about and plan this thing. So I've been following it for a long time. But one is struck, Sibongile and team, by the sheer scope of the agenda that you presented. And my concern is that you're spreading your efforts too thinly and to do things well, in effect. It's too comprehensive, it's too broad, it's too enormous in scope. And just to take the issue of metro finances, you mentioned this report demonstrating deterioration before the COVID crisis. You know, I'm just concerned that the CSP is not focusing on the areas where it can make the biggest impact. So that's a provocation. You need to focus to be strategic and to be effective. What is the CSP most proud of in terms of its achievements? Is it putting that as a question? The second concern and related concern is that the style of working is a bit inward looking. I think Mike talked about insular or inward looking. A bit technocratic might be another way of describing it. Now, this is related to what Sibongile, what you were saying about the political challenges, not just corruption, but lack of support. I want to quote you briefly. You know, something that from a speech, if you bear with me, just a few sentences, a speech by the Minister of Cogta. Our cities are bursting at the seams with the rural urban migration. No matter how much we redesign and revamp our cities, they simply were not designed to take such large inflows. We must therefore transform our rural settlements by giving them a more urban face. As we build new cities, we must focus on areas such as our Tambo district and locate opportunities as well as our smart cities there. This will curb the rural-urban migration trends. Now, this is the minister in charge of the IUDF. You know, for her to be saying that, it strikes me that she doesn't appreciate any of the work of the CSP. How can one reconcile a statement like that, which says the future of South Africa lies in rural areas, with everything that the CSP is trying to do? So my third point is about informal settlements. I think it's shocking that what you were saying about the lack of progress, the lack of political buy-in. So again, after 26 years of democracy, why are we still getting little traction in informal settlements? You know, I think we need to be honest about the challenges of making progress and focus more and be, you know, recognize that in order to make progress, we can't bite off more than we can chew. And we need to strategize around these massive challenges that our cities face. Strategize not just around the coffee table, but involving, you know, key actors and stakeholders in a very strategic way in order to address these things. Otherwise, we'll be here in 5 years' time and 10 years' time, and we'll be saying the same things again. What have we achieved? Why are we still struggling to make progress on these really obvious agendas of integration, of tackling poor communities, improving conditions of poor communities, and of, you know, the urgent municipal finance agenda? These are massively important issues, and we can't just proceed, it seems to me, the way we tend to.
Thanks very much, Ivan. Those are really compelling questions about government as a whole, but also the sort of a friendly critique of the CSP. Lene, are there other? I think we could take one or two furthers. Further questions?
At the moment, I'm not seeing anyone.
Okay, I see there is activity on the chat. Is there anything there that we need to respond to?
Can I request that Prof, if Samantha could come in around the IUDF and maybe also with Yasmin, and then I also would like to have Anthea coming in on the independent power production and also the court, Supreme Court decision today. And also if we could actually just have, I'm not sure if Benedette is in the room, around the broadness of our planning and our offerings, and I'll also come in there. And any of our colleagues who wants to comment, but may I start with those ones that I've identified already?
Many thanks. There's also a question around the BRT. Have you covered that?
I think yes. Thank you, Prof. Malebu is in the room and she can also cover the eThekwini BRT. Thank you very much. Can you colleagues start? Sam, you want to kick?
Hi everyone, it's Samantha here. Yeah, I mean, you've given me to answer about the IUDF. I mean, I think Yasmin has responded.
You want to comment on, Sam?
I think Yasmin has responded in relation to the minister, you know, and the quote that Ivan related around the, you know, the issue of urban versus rural. And I think at a political level, the rural agenda is still very much present. I mean, Ivan, you were very much also involved in the early stages of the IUDF, and even in trying to, you know, develop the IUDF and write that up, even you, Phil, as well, there was a narrative that needed to be related to the rural as well. So it was like, felt that every time you deal with urban, you also need to look at it, look at the rural. I think with CSP though, we've been quite clear that it is the urban agenda, that the statistics are saying that there's migration to urban centers, the poor is in urban centers, and I think our program has over the years focused on that. We understand within some of our municipal contexts that there's areas that are rural as well, and our cities are grappling in terms of how to deal with that. You know, for instance, in Swane, in eThekwini, etc. So I mean, I think, you know, that, you know, it's not just in the political spaces that the rural comes up constantly, but I think from a program perspective that we've been clear about the focus on the rural, I mean, sorry, on the urban. I think it is still something that the IUDF is grappling with, and I think Deputy Minister Tau is also trying to engage that. So, you know, within his own ministry and that Copter ministry, I think there are tensions that are coming up, but at a political level, they're trying to deal with that. I think the issue, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the focus of our program, and I agree. I think, you know, a lot of us in our team would say that we're trying to get as focused as we can. I think you know, given that the program is about demand as well, you know, we've been looking at our program from a supply perspective, but also a demand perspective in terms of what cities are grappling with currently. And given that kind of demand perspective, I think sometimes our program goes wider than what the intention is, and also there's the level of flexibility there that we have in terms of responding to some of the what's happening at the city level currently. So I think those are issues though that have taken us a little bit broader than what we should be doing. And when we engage with national departments as well, the agenda seems to go beyond what the initial focus of CSP is. So, I mean, I think those points by Ivan made are very relevant. And yeah, it's things that we are constantly managing and trying to navigate as we move forward, and as we try to focus a little bit more to try to get things institutionalized, bearing in mind that the program has another 3.5 years at the most before it will be closed down. Sibongile, if there's anybody else.
Anthea, do you want to come in? I saw you on the chat, and if you are still waiting for clarity, can I ask Mohammed to clarify his question to you, please?
Sure, yeah, here, shed some light on the framework of devolution and procurement court decision. Okay, I didn't see the announcement from the Gauteng High Court decision, which is interesting. I'll certainly look into that. So shed some light on the framework of devolution. So this is early days work, Mohammed, that we're doing, which is to provide clarity on the regulatory framework for municipalities to procure power from independent power producers. It's a complex issue. The recently sort of amended regs are the subject of further engagement between the different sector departments, and we've been working and engaging with DMRE and with Treasury colleagues on that to try and sort of iron out creases in there. But what we're wanting to do is to provide sort of an overarching set of, or sort of clarity on the steps that municipalities need to go through in order to procure power. It has been unclear. The reason the City of Cape Town went to court was to try and sort of force the hand of the court to get a precedent to guide on exactly what was needed in addition to the Section 34 determination, what supporting information was needed in that process. And I'll look into what the judgment has asked for. But so from my side, I think what I can say is that it's early days of our work, and what we're wanting to do is to provide the very clear guidance that will enable municipalities to proceed confidently and clearly, and understanding, if they are embarking on pre-feasibility or feasibility studies, just how much investment they need to put in to get the approvals at the various stages of the process. Thank you.
Malebu?
Thank you, PM. Let me switch on camera and so that people can see who's speaking. Thank you, Mohammed, for your question. I just want to maybe open it up and say it's not necessarily a problem in terms of BRT implementation that is being experienced by eThekwini. Perhaps eThekwini is becoming obvious because their launch date has been moved from last year, July, and a new date hasn't been in place as yet due to the processes that they are undertaking with the minibus taxi discussions. If you really have a perspective of all BRTs that are either at operational or just about to go live, you would know that almost all cities had gone under some form of difficulties to really start with the operations. and a lot of them are still in the planning mode. If you had a look at one of the planning reform exercise that we are undertaking with DOT, is that we want to really assess cities and determine why they are struggling, and all of them haven't met their original rollout plans that they submitted about 10 years ago when they were part of the public transport strategy. You know the evolution of the PTNG itself. So we have crafted an approach which we are in discussion with, and that approach really will then look at both cities as well as DOT, because we are of the opinion as CSP that you can't only look at cities and say the problem is lying there. The DOT itself, we intend to do a number of interviews with their program managers and understand how they have been providing oversight role to cities, particularly in the PTNG allocation and oversight. And then with cities, we also intend to have a one-on-one engagement, because context is also very important. Although we know, especially if you've been in the space, that there are specific aspects that really cities have been battling with without preempting the results of the work itself. We know they've been struggling with minibus taxi negotiations that have prolonged some of the cities rolling out their BRT. Some of them have struggled, particularly with infrastructure implementation. Some have capacity issues. So just to name three that are really, really prominent. But we are hoping with this discussion with the cities, we will be able to go in depth, understanding some of the operational issues that they are experiencing. And out of that work, we then consolidate and also then provide a roadmap and a way forward on how, excuse me, my husband and I are fighting for space. He just walked in, he's on a conference call. Thank you, babe. Sorry about that. So then out of that work, we are hoping that then we can be in a position to advise cities and the DOT itself on how they roll it out. Because the concern we have as Treasury, I'm not sure if you are aware, Mohammed and the other colleagues, that one city got and two secondary city had their PTNG suspended this year. As a sector, we are fighting for the fiscus like with other sectors. So it's becoming very important that this work really comes out so that we turn ourselves around, ourselves, DOT, as well as metros. So yes, it's not a eThekwini problem only, Mohammed. It's a global, if you look at all the cities that have been receiving PTNG, and we are hoping that with this work, at least we can assist to turn the condition around. Thank you.
Seth, on informal settlements upgrading.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Just very quickly on the informal settlements upgrading, the question that was raised by Ivan. I think it's important that to state that the issue of informal settlements upgrading in our cities remain a very complex issue. And it's also very space that is contested by the different, role players as well as spheres of government in terms of consensus of how to really scale up upgrading, in our cities. As you may recently have seen that whilst there was an effort now to focus more on in situ incremental upgrading, bang with the, COVID-19, there's a very, a big shift now towards relocation and de-densification. And so there seems to be no real and meaningful consensus as to the approach of informal settlements upgrading. And my view is that that is creating a lot of confusion at a city level in as far as incremental and in situ upgrading, and also aligning that to more spatial transformation and building, a social inclusion, in our cities. The issue now is, what are we doing as CSP, in this place? I think our agenda is very clear as the city support program that we are promoting basically more of a citywide and programmatic upgrading to, informal settlements upgrading. And with that, what we have done over the past 2 years is that we believe that there are serious and major barriers that are inhibiting the city from scaling up citywide and programmatic upgrading. We identified about 14, key barriers to citywide upgrading, including institutional framework that is not working properly between the three spheres of government, the issues of enabling, regulatory environment with regard to in situ upgrading, and also the issue of political will and consensus that I have spoken about. On the basis of the barriers that we identified, working with the cities, working with National Department of Human Settlements, as well as the National Upgrading Program, we then developed what was called a program management, upgrading toolkit, which we developed with the city as well as other, national government stakeholders. As the first step, we basically institutionalized or incorporated that toolkit within the National Upgrading Support Program, which is the entity of the National Department of Human Settlements, as our support to the sector to promote citywide programmatic upgrading. As a consequence of that, there is a program that NASP is going to be implementing now to strengthen and to provide capacity to the 8 metros in as far as citywide and programmatic upgrading, where they will be helping them basically to develop these citywide, plans. But as CSP as well, we are also in the process now of going to each and every, metro or city to also to be providing support to them individually in terms of technical support, hands-on handling support, to be able basically to effectively apply this toolkit on their emerging business so that they can start now, meaningfully to be upgrading, citywide in a proactive as well as a progressive manner in terms of, reactive in their approach. That's basically what we're doing, but there are a lot of other initiatives that are taking place that I'm not going to be mentioning at this present moment. I think for now, I've just focused on what we're doing as CSP in terms of supporting the sector and also in terms of supporting the cities as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prof. I think for me, just like the last comment I want to make is that the public transport devolution or devolution of some of the rail issues, those have been given a blow by also the challenge that PRASA has suffered in the past years around the state of its infrastructure and the state of the rail itself. Secondly, just the issue around the High Court decision. I think for me, unfortunately, the court decided to actually say the Cape Town matter is not urgent and stayed and actually said the matter should go into intergovernmental engagement. But the reality of the situation is that the process of defining the rules of engagement in relation to Regulation 34 has started, and the metros must actually be supported in looking at this particular opportunities of independent power production as a source of revenue. Thank you very much, Prof. Over to you.
Sibongile, I just wondered if you want to comment very, very briefly. I'm watching time, so we're going to wrap up now. But on Ivan's comment that you may be spreading yourself too thin, given the sheer scope of the agenda. Do you want to comment briefly on that?
I thought that Sam had touched on that. I think we agree. We are actually worried about the way we are spreading ourselves or how thin we are spreading ourselves. But we also want to say we are actually a catalytic program. We want to start these conversations so that they can find their institutionalization in national departments as a policy reform type. But definitely, as Sam has said, we actually accept that point. And the fact that we are a demand project, and sometimes, for example, all the projects that we are doing under COVID were not projects that we planned, but because COVID happened, they became so urgent and we are actually dealing with them, and the metros would like to be assisted. But we are not losing focus on the priority projects, like the issue around long-term financial planning and revenue management for the metros. Those are, for us, the issues of spatial planning, the issues around the reforms that I referred to. And that is why, out of the number of projects we have selected what are key projects in each and every component that we are driving. And that is what we want to actually be judged against as the program gets to its end. Thank you, Prof.
Right. Thanks so much, Sibongile. It's such a big discussion, and it's going to need to be an ongoing conversation. So I hope you'll agree to further sessions with us. And I'm sorry if we didn't get to everyone who has their hands up. So I mean, there's so much that has been covered. Just one point. Well, that's just to raise, I think, is the point about the way in which COVID has provided cover, I think, for political moves that do seem to be regressive in terms of the urban agenda we've been talking about. And perhaps we haven't been that successful as a community in terms of engaging politically. We might be more or less on the same page in a group like this, but it doesn't help if it's so easily undermined at the political level. So there's discussion that's needed here, but many, many other areas of discussion. I want to just ask Lene, I know she put it on the chat, but if Lene could just quickly tell us about next week's session.
Yeah, sorry, I had it typed out and now it's disappeared. Just hold on 1 second. So yeah, the talk next week is by Professor Nancy Oudendal from UCT, called Platform Urbanism and Hybrid Places in African Cities.
Thanks so much, Lene, and thanks for all your support. And we hope to see you next week. It's really been a really great session, really vigorous engagement. And so thank you so much to Sibongile and to the full CSP team. And we really do hope to see you back. And to everyone for staying to the end.
Thank you, Prof, and thank you to everyone for the insight. I think we always will rely on the academia and this expert group to always guide us and advise us. And we appreciate your inputs, and we're taking them to heart. And would like to open ourselves to further engagements in the future and to invitations to your engagement also, so that we can actually expand our networking horizon. Thank you very much, Prof.
Great. Go well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Go well.